Hello everyone. Every night we walk through the dust of history, every forgotten disaster, and tonight we step onto a ferry that may never have come back in its own time. The deck creaks like an old man's knees, and the sky above is swollen with a storm that doesn't seem to move. They say this island swallows people as easily as it once swallowed an entire army, and if you listen hard enough, the sea itself whispers their names. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really like what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and what time it is. The metal under your boots is a patchwork of orange rust and flaking paint, as if the ferry has been trying to shed its own skin for years. Each step sends up a dull clang, and for a moment you wonder if the sound could be heard from the shore, warning something out there that you are coming. In West, ferries like this were commandeered to carry troops, and some never made the return trip, sunk in sudden bursts of artillery or disappearing in the heavy fog that rolled in without warning. The captain is a wiry man who smells faintly of tobacco and diesel fuel, and his eyes never meet yours for longer than a heartbeat. When you tell him where you're going, he shrugs, mutters something in his language that you can't quite catch, and starts the engine. You're not fluent, but you're fairly certain it wasn't "have a nice day." Historians are still debating whether the ferry route you're taking is the same one used during the battle, or if it skirts the site entirely to avoid certain obstacles. The sea around you is too calm, almost suspiciously so. No waves slap against the hull, the water simply slides away, black and glassy, reflecting the dark belly of the clouds overhead. Once, these waters were thick with troop transports, their decks stacked with crates of ammunition and weary soldiers smoking cigarettes down to the filter. Now, only your lone ferry cuts the surface. Somewhere beneath you lie the bones of ships, and, if rumor is right, a few that never had time to become graves before they were swallowed whole. You lean against the railing and watch the horizon, but there's nothing to measure your movement by. No other vessels, no gulls, not even the floating debris you'd expect in a working harbor. It reminds you of that odd fact about the Sargasso Sea, where ships once drifted for weeks in a strange calm, surrounded by mats of floating seaweed. The thought makes you glance back at the engine, half expecting to find it idling and the boat motionless. But no, the churn of the propeller is steady. The captain lights a cigarette, squints into the distance, and points with two fingers. You follow the gesture and catch your first glimpse of something on the horizon. At first it's just a line, too thin to be land, too jagged to be a cloud bank. As you get closer, you see it for what it is. The masts of sunken ships breaking the surface, tilted like broken teeth in the mouth of the sea. The sight is so abrupt that you almost miss the way the air changes. Heavier, colder, as if you've crossed an invisible threshold. The ferry angles toward a gap in the jagged line, and you realize these are not just any shipwrecks. They're remnants of the blockade meant to trap enemy vessels during the war. Some historians claim the rusting hulks were left intentionally, both as a warning and as a physical barrier. Others insist they were never cleared simply because it was easier to let them rot than to face the cost of removal. Either way, their presence means you're getting close, too close maybe for comfort. By the time the island comes into focus beyond the wrecks, you can see that the clouds above it are darker than those over the open sea, as if the weather itself has learned to stay. The shape of the land is low and hunched, with jagged ridges that rise like a spine toward the center. And just as you're about to ask the captain how long until you dock, he cuts the engine. The silence is deafening, broken only by the creak of the ferry as it drifts between the rusted guardians of the island shore. The ferry noses toward a strip of sand that looks almost too narrow to hold a boat, its edges littered with shadows you can't yet make out. As you get closer, those shadows take shape. Dozens of corroded helmets, some half buried in the tide line, others overturned and holding rainwater thick with mosquito larvae. Each one seems to stare back at you, eyeless and hollow, like they've been waiting for someone to pick them up and remember who wore them. But here, names are as lost as the tide that first carried these helmets to shore. When your boots touch the sand, it feels softer than you expect, almost spongy. The wind shifts and carries the scent of salt and metal, like a coin pressed against your tongue. During the war, this beach was the first and last site for soldiers on both sides. Troops landed here under fire, some never making it past the first dune. The sand in some places is rumored to still hide shrapnel, though the locals claim it's bad luck to dig for it. Whether they mean bad luck in superstition or bad luck in what you might find is left unspoken. Just ahead, a landing craft lies on its side, its steel skin pitted with rust and long scars of bullet holes. The holes are neat and round, but inside the edges have bloomed into jagged rust, like flowers blooming in reverse. You run your fingers over one and wonder if this was made in the first moments of the landing or in some desperate retreat. Historians still can't agree on whether the craft was abandoned mid-battle or dragged ashore afterward for repairs that never came. The truth is, on this island, everything feels half-finished. A few yards inland, you spot an old field stove, its chimney bent like a broken neck. It still holds the blackened remains of something cooked long ago. A stew, maybe, or rice. The pan beside it is welded to the surface by corrosion, as if the meal and the moment it was cooked have been locked here forever. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you picture a soldier ladling out portions under a rain of gunfire, too hungry to care if the soup came with a side of danger. The beach curves toward a pile of driftwood, but when you look closer, you realize it's not wood at all. It's the skeletal remains of rifle stocks, stripped of their barrels and worn smooth by the sea. Some have been here so long they're more salt than wood now. Among them, a single bayonet blade juts out at an angle, catching the late afternoon light like a warning sign. The absurdity of it reminds you of that fact about the Titanic's deck chairs washing ashore months after the ship sank. How the smallest artifacts can outlive the grandest machines. Behind you, the ferry captain is already reversing the boat back into deeper water. He doesn't wave, he doesn't call out. He just disappears into the haze, leaving you alone with the sound of the surf and a feeling that the island itself is sizing you up. You remember reading that some WW2 veterans refused to return to their old battlefields, not because of bad memories, but because they feared disturbing whatever had settled there since. You wonder briefly if you should have felt the same way. The tide pulls at the edges of your boots, wrapping sea foam around your ankles like a reminder that the island is not just land. It's an intersection between the living sea and the dead ground. Each time a wave recedes, it takes a little more sand with it, as if trying to reclaim the shore one grain at a time. You can't help thinking that the helmets and rusted debris aren't just left here by chance. They've been brought back over and over by the ocean itself. Ahead, the narrow beach widens into a low trail climbing toward a wall of green. The jungle waits there, dark and impenetrable, like a second gate you'll have to pass through to reach the island's heart. But the real threshold you realize was here, this strip of sand where men once rushed forward into battle, where the first things they saw were enemy fire, and the last things they left were the tools of survival. And now you've stepped onto it too. The trail climbs gently at first, then angles upward as the sand gives way to hard-packed earth. Roots twist across the path like the veins of the island, and the air grows warmer, heavier with each step. Before long, the faint hiss of the surf is replaced by the creak and groan of unseen branches overhead. It's as if the jungle is slowly leaning in, closing its canopy to hide whatever lies deeper inside. You've read about tropical reclamation, the way nature swallows battlefields whole. But here it feels less like nature's patience and more like hunger. Vines as thick as your wrist wind themselves around the rusted skeleton of a tank, its barrel aimed forever at a point just beyond your sight. Moss creeps up its flanks, and banyan roots push through open hatches, pulling the steel into the soil. It's a strange, almost absurd image, like a boa constrictor deciding to keep a suit of armor as a pet. Historians still debate whether this tank was destroyed in the first clash or abandoned in retreat. But standing here, you realize the answer hardly matters. The jungle has claimed it either way. A glint catches your eye beside the path, half hidden under a carpet of leaves. You brush them aside to reveal a battered ration tin, its lid pried open. Inside is nothing but dust and the faint outline of what was once a biscuit. It's odd to think that somewhere, a soldier carried this tin through gunfire, guarded it for a meal that never happened. It reminds you of the fact that Napoleon's army lost more men to spoiled food than to enemy fire. Sometimes history's greatest defeats begin in the stomach. Farther along, the path narrows where the jungle seems to press inward. The leaves overhead are so thick they block out most of the light, turning the space into a green tunnel. It's in that dimness that you notice something unsettling. Birdsong that had been constant since you left the beach stops abruptly, as if someone flipped a switch. The silence feels solid, pressing against your ears, making your own footsteps sound too loud. You can't see anything moving, but you know somehow you are being watched. You step carefully, aware that the ground is uneven, the soil interrupted by old metal plates half swallowed by roots. Some are barely larger than dinner plates, others the size of manhole covers. You wonder if they were parts of artillery platforms or the remains of hastily constructed shelters. No one seems to know exactly how much of the island was fortified during the war. Records are patchy, and eyewitness accounts often contradict one another. Some even claim that certain areas were never recorded at all, either out of secrecy or superstition. In the middle of this green chokehold, you pass under a massive banyan tree whose roots spill over the trail like frozen waterfalls. One root has split open what might have been a munitions crate, now nothing more than splintered wood and a few rusted nails. The way the roots curl around the crate makes it look almost deliberate, as if the tree decided it was too dangerous to let the contents out. It's funny in a grim way, nature playing the role of quartermaster, keeping supplies locked away. Somewhere to your left, you hear a quick rustle in the underbrush, followed by the metallic clink of something small striking a rock. You pause, scanning the greenery, but whatever it was is already gone. Maybe a crab carrying a shell casing again. You remember seeing that on the beach. But here, so far inland, the thought feels stranger. It makes you wonder if the island has been scattering its own relics, letting them drift into view like bait. By the time the trail finally widens, the air feels thicker and sweat clings to your skin. Ahead, the jungle parts just enough to show a concrete shape breaking through the foliage. A structure, square and low, with vines hanging from its roof like curtains. You know without being told that this is no ordinary ruin. The last command post is somewhere beyond, but to reach it, you'll have to step inside the mouth of the jungle's oldest secret. The structure looms larger as you approach, its concrete walls stained black with decades of moisture. A single doorway gapes open, no door to block the view inside, just a rectangle of shadow against the dim jungle light. You step closer and see the edges of the frame chipped and cracked, as if something once tried to break its way in or out. The air here is cooler, still, carrying a faint metallic tang mixed with the deep, wet smell of moss. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you know, this was the last command post. Inside, your footsteps echo against bare walls, the sound bouncing off in a way that makes the room feel bigger than it is. On one wall, a faded map is still pinned under a cracked sheet of glass. The colors have bled into each other with age, but you can make out faint red arrows pushing inland, blue ones bending toward the beach. Historians are still debating whether these marks were from the final days of the battle or added later by someone trying to piece together what happened here. Either way, they're a frozen moment, a plan left unfinished. A desk stands in one corner, its wood warped and splintered from years of damp air. You tug open a drawer and find a small notebook inside, its pages stuck together. You peel one apart carefully and catch glimpses of handwriting, dates, coordinates, fragments of sentences. The last page ends midline, the ink smeared into a shapeless blot. It's the kind of abrupt stop that makes you wonder, was the writer interrupted, or did the battle end here for them in that exact moment? On another table rests a cracked radio, its dials frozen in place. You run your hand over the dust-thick surface and imagine it once filled the air with clipped, urgent voices, orders, warnings, maybe even final farewells. The frequency marked on the dial is one you don't recognize, and you recall reading that certain wartime channels were never documented publicly. Some researchers suggest these ghost frequencies still linger, carrying faint signals no one has fully explained. The idea sends a quiet shiver through you. In the corner, a rusted ammunition box leans open, its contents long removed. Inside is nothing but a few bent nails and a scrap of paper stuck to the bottom with dried glue. It looks like it was torn from a larger sheet, the edges jagged. The paper's blank now, the ink faded entirely, but the way it's folded suggests it was once a note meant for someone specific. The absence of words makes it feel louder than any written order could have. Light spills in through a hole in the roof, illuminating a small patch of the floor where ferns have begun to grow. Their green fronds sway gently in a breeze you can't feel, almost as if they're breathing. It's strange to think of life thriving here after so much loss, like the island itself is quietly rearranging the past, covering the worst memories with new growth. You find yourself wondering if that's kindness or concealment. You take one last walk around the room, noting the small details. A spent shell casing wedged between two floorboards. The faint outline of something square on the wall, where a picture might have hung. A single spider web strung across the ceiling like a fine net. None of it seems extraordinary on its own, but together they feel like a private museum, one where every exhibit whispers only to those who stand very still. When you step back outside, the light feels too bright, the air too hot. The jungle sounds return all at once. Birds and insects calling as if they'd been holding their breath. You glance back at the command post, half hidden in green, and it strikes you that this was once the brain of the island's defense. Now it's just another piece of bone in the body of the land, slowly being pulled under. And you, having seen its last heartbeat, are about to walk deeper toward the island's most dangerous memory. The moon is just beginning to show itself when you push farther along the coastline, the sand narrowing until you're forced to step over a tangle of rope and twisted scrap. It takes a moment to realize the shapes scattered ahead aren't driftwood or fishing gear. They're helmets, dozens of them, scattered like a broken formation. Some are tilted at odd angles, half buried in the tide's edge. Others sitting upright, cups of seawater reflecting pale light. They don't feel abandoned. They feel arranged, like the sea has been setting its own table for something you can't see yet. You crouch beside one, brushing your hand over its rough, pitted surface. It's heavier than you expect, waterlogged from years of salt soaking into the steel. The inside is lined with small barnacles, clustered where a soldier's head might have been. You think of those odd stories about deep-sea wrecks turning into coral reefs, how life finds a way to make a home in what used to be a grave. The idea doesn't comfort you. It's hard to feel at ease knowing nature might be decorating the dead. Not far from the helmets lies a shape like a beached whale. But as you approach, you see the hard lines of its hull, the fractured edges of a ramp that once opened to let soldiers spill onto the sand. It's a landing craft, its skin eaten away by rust, its metal curling in places like burnt paper. You step closer and peer through a gap where the side has collapsed. Inside, the floor is littered with empty ammo boxes and the faint outlines of boot prints that no tide has dared to wash away. A little farther inland, you find what must have been a field kitchen. The stove is squat and boxy, its chimney bent as if swatted by an angry giant. A pot still rests on top, fused there by corrosion, the inside blackened to a deep, dull sheen. You imagine soldiers crouched here, ladling out soup in the middle of chaos, their hands shaking more from exhaustion than fear. It reminds you of that peculiar wartime fact, that armies have sometimes halted mid-battle to serve tea or coffee, because morale is just as much a weapon as any rifle. The air grows stiller as you move down the beach, as if the island itself is watching. You pass a pile of debris that turns out to be wooden rifle stocks, stripped of barrels, bleached pale by years of sun. Among them, a single bayonet blade sticks up from the sand, catching the light with a flash that feels almost deliberate. You think of stories about unlucky objects, cursed swords, coins that sink every ship that carries them, and you keep walking, telling yourself it's just superstition. Behind you, the faint rumble of the ferry's engine has long faded. You glance back, but there's only open water, pale under the rising moon. You're alone now, and the emptiness presses in from both the jungle and the sea. Somewhere in that silence, you remember reading that some veterans refused to visit their old battlefields, not because of bad memories, but because they feared disturbing whatever had taken root there since. Right now, you understand exactly what they meant. The tide tugs gently at your boots, wrapping foam around your ankles. Every retreating wave takes a little more sand with it, as if the ocean is trying to pull the ground from under you grain by grain. The helmets you passed earlier bob in the shallows, shifting ever so slightly with each swell, as if nodding to you in some slow, deliberate rhythm. It's hard not to imagine them watching you leave their stretch of shore. The path ahead widens into a low rise that curves toward the tree line, where the beach ends and the green wall of the jungle begins. The sand is littered with smaller fragments now, belt buckles, empty shell casings, the rusted hinges of what might have been a trunk. Each one feels like a breadcrumb leading you somewhere deeper, somewhere the island has been keeping for itself. You step toward it, and the sound of the waves fades behind you like a door swinging shut. The jungle greets you with a sudden change in air, warmer, damp, and carrying the earthy scent of leaves decomposing underfoot. The light shifts too, filtered through a canopy so thick it turns the path into a long green tunnel. Your boots crunch over a carpet of dead foliage, and somewhere above, something moves just out of sight, its presence marked only by the faint swish of branches. You get the feeling the island has been waiting for you to step past the tree line before revealing its true self. It doesn't take long to see the first of the island's captives, a rusting tank, its once mighty barrel aimed uselessly at a wall of vines. The armor is riddled with small holes, maybe from shrapnel, maybe from decades of rain eating away at the steel. Thick banyan roots have grown over the tracks, like a hand pinning it to the earth. You've read that some W-wheat tanks still operate in remote parts of the world after minimal repairs. This one will never move again, but it feels like it's still on duty, guarding something it refuses to let go. A few steps later, your foot nudges an object hidden in the undergrowth. A metal can, split open along the seam. When you wipe away the dirt, you see the faded imprint of English letters and a date almost worn away. Inside, there's nothing but crumbs, pale and chalky. It's strange to think this might have been carried in someone's pack, guarded like treasure during the battle, only to be abandoned here. That odd wartime truth comes to mind again. Armies march on their stomachs, but sometimes it's the stomach that decides to stop marching first. The deeper you go, the more the jungle feels like it's reclaiming everything with purpose. Trees grow out of collapsed gun mounts, their roots wrapping around the metal like they're holding it in place. Vines drape over the remains of sandbag walls, now just mounds of dirt and moss. Historians are still debating whether these fortifications were ever finished, or if the defenders were forced to abandon them mid-construction. Standing here, the truth seems obvious. It doesn't matter. The jungle finished the job in its own way. A sound cuts through the quiet, a bird's sharp call, then nothing. Complete silence, as if the forest itself has been muted. You stop walking and realize the usual background hum of insects is gone too. The absence of sound is so complete it makes your ears ring. You look around, half expecting to see movement, but the foliage is still. It's unsettling enough to make you wonder if the island controls its own soundtrack, turning the volume up or down depending on who's listening. The path narrows ahead, forcing you to duck under low-hanging branches. Beneath one, a crate lies split open, its wood darkened by years of damp. The markings are barely visible, but you can make out "Property of U.S. Army" stenciled in black. Inside is nothing but rotting rope and the faint smell of oil. You've read about caches like this being buried in case of retreat, sometimes found decades later with everything intact. Here, though, the jungle didn't wait for anyone to dig it up. It simply tore it apart. You step around a fallen tree, the bark stripped away to reveal pale wood beneath. On top of it rests a single boot, the leather stiff and crumbling. There's no foot inside, just the hollow shape where one once was. It's a strange reminder that the things people leave behind aren't always abandoned by choice. You picture a soldier running, boot lost in the mud, never coming back for it, maybe never having the chance. The trail finally opens slightly, and sunlight pours through a gap in the canopy. Ahead, the green gives way to gray. The concrete outline of a low building, its roof sagging under the weight of years. The jungle has stopped just short of swallowing it completely, as if even the plants aren't eager to get too close. You can't see the inside yet, But something tells you this building didn't fall to nature. It fell to whatever happened here before nature arrived. The building rises out of the undergrowth like a stubborn memory, its concrete walls streaked with dark stains that might be water or something else entirely. The doorway is nothing more than a jagged opening. No door, no frame, just an invitation into shadow. You step inside and the temperature drops instantly. It's the kind of cold that doesn't belong in the tropics, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Somewhere above, water drips in a slow, steady rhythm, the sound echoing like a clock counting down to something unseen. Against the far wall hangs a large glass-covered map, the edges curling where the moisture has gotten in. The paper is yellowed and warped, but you can still see faded red and blue lines crisscrossing the island's outline. Red arrows push toward the coast, blue ones toward the jungle's center. Historians are still debating whether these were drawn during the battle or afterward as a reconstruction. Either way, the lines feel urgent, as if they were drawn by someone who knew their time was running out. To the right, a desk slumps against the wall, its drawers swollen from years of damp air. You pull one open and find a tangle of papers fused together into a single unreadable block. One page has managed to escape the moisture, and you catch the faintest scrawl of handwriting. A name, maybe, followed by a string of numbers. The ink trails off mid-line, and your mind fills in the silence where the next word should have been. It's a pause that feels final. On a nearby table sits a radio, its casing cracked, the dial stuck between frequencies. You brush away a thick layer of dust, revealing a small label etched into the side, a code you don't recognize. You've heard the stories, wartime frequencies that still bleed faint signals decades later, whispers in the static. Some even claim to have heard music from stations that no longer exist. You can't decide if that's fascinating or just a little too close to the truth for comfort. A shaft of light breaks through a hole in the roof, landing on an ammunition box shoved into the corner. You pry it open to find only emptiness and a strange, sweet smell that doesn't belong here. It reminds you of overripe fruit, the kind that's pleasant at first but turns your stomach if you linger. It's such a small detail, yet it sticks in your mind, refusing to leave. The floor under your boots is uneven, the concrete cracked and buckled in places. In one split, you see the gleam of something metallic, maybe a spent shell casing, maybe just a piece of pipe. You crouch to look closer, but it's lodged too deep to pull free. It makes you think of how much of this place is hidden just below the surface, like an iceberg with most of its story buried where no one can see. In the far corner, a spider web stretches between two broken chair legs, the silk catching the light like silver thread. It's intact, perfect, undisturbed. Somehow that feels stranger than anything else you've seen so far. In a place that's been battered by war, weather, and time, the smallest thing has survived without a scratch. It's almost defiant. You step back out into the light, blinking as the jungle noise rushes back in. The hum of insects, the distant cry of a bird, the rustle of leaves in a breeze you can't feel on your skin. The building stands behind you, silent and watchful, like it's not finished with you yet. But ahead, the trail continues, leading deeper into a place where even the plants seem to walk in step with the island's memory. The path beyond the building begins to slope gently upward, curling around a cluster of trees whose roots knot across the ground like the fingers of a clenched fist. The canopy thickens again, letting only narrow strips of light reach the forest floor. You notice the air is heavier here, as if each breath has to push through something unseen. Every step feels like you're being measured, weighed against the countless footsteps that must have passed here before you. Halfway up the rise, you come across what looks like a shallow trench, its edges softened by time. Fallen leaves and vines spill into it, but the shape is still clear, a scar in the earth that refuses to heal completely. You've read accounts describing soldiers digging in like this, sometimes under the cover of night, sometimes in a frantic rush as gunfire closed in. Historians are still debating whether trenches like these were part of the island's original defense, or carved in desperation when things began to turn. A few steps later, you see a rusted bayonet protruding from the ground, stuck upright as if someone planted it there intentionally. The handle is cracked, the blade pitted with age, yet it stands as straight as a marker in a forgotten cemetery. You hesitate before touching it, imagining the hand that last gripped it. Was it planted here as a warning, or simply dropped in the chaos and swallowed by the earth until now? Either way, you leave it where it is. The air shifts again, faint, but enough to carry a smell that makes you pause. It's sharp, metallic, and unmistakable. The lingering scent of cordite, the ghost of gunfire long past. It's absurd, of course. The last shots fired here were decades ago, and yet it's there, clinging to the damp breeze, making you glance over your shoulder as if expecting to see smoke still hanging in the air. You step over a cluster of rocks only to realize they're not rocks at all. They're discarded shell casings, their surfaces dulled by years of rain. They're larger than you expect, heavy enough to make you think of the weapons they once fed. Some are lodged deep in the soil, others rest on the surface, almost inviting you to pick them up. But you've already noticed the crabs here don't carry seashells. They carry these instead, dragging them across the sand like trophies. The thought of one skittering past you with a casing in its claw is unsettling enough to keep your hands at your sides. The path narrows once more, forcing you to duck under a low arch of twisted branches. Just beyond it, the jungle opens suddenly, spilling out onto a ridge that overlooks the coastline you left behind. From up here, the beach looks almost serene, the rusting landing craft and scattered helmets reduced to specks in the pale sand. It's a trick of distance, the kind that makes even the worst places look peaceful if you stand far enough away. For a moment, you just stand there, letting the wind push at your shoulders, carrying with it the faint roar of waves and something else, something rhythmic. You realize it's the sound of marching, faint and steady, as if coming from far below. It's probably the tide echoing through the rocks, you tell yourself, but the beat never falters. It keeps time as you turn away from the view, following the ridge inland, toward whatever waits beyond. By the time the jungle swallows you again, the sound has faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the steady thud of your own heartbeat. You have the sense you've just crossed another invisible threshold, one of many on this island. Each one brings you closer to its center, but also deeper into its past. And the past here doesn't stay buried for long. The ridge narrows until the path forces you to walk single file, even though you're the only one here. On one side, the jungle leans in, its leaves brushing your shoulders like fingers. On the other, the ground falls away into a tangle of rock and shadow where the light never seems to reach. The air is thicker here, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like the echo of a memory you can taste but can't name. You get the feeling this is the kind of place where people stop talking, even if they're alone. The trail curves sharply, and that's when you see it, the faint outline of a trench, zigzagging across the ridge like an old scar. It's half filled with leaves and soil, but the shape is unmistakable. You've seen photographs of trenches like these, hastily dug, often at night, sometimes just hours before an attack. Historians are still debating whether this ridge was fortified from the start or turned into a desperate last stand when the enemy closed in. Standing here, it feels less like a defensive line and more like the lip of an open grave. A flash of sunlight catches on something buried in the soil at your feet. You kneel and brush away the dirt, revealing the edge of a steel helmet. It's dented along one side, the paint chipped down to bare metal. Inside, a spider has made a perfect web, the strands shimmering in the light. There's something unsettling about it, the way life has moved in without erasing what came before. You set the helmet back in place, and for a second, it feels like you're tucking it in. The further you go, the more the ridge shows signs of what it once was. Sections of sandbag wall sag into the earth, their fabric long since rotted away, leaving only mounds of soil studded with roots. A rusted water canteen hangs from a branch, swaying slightly in the breeze, though there's no wind strong enough to move it. You think of that strange fact about abandoned battlefields, how sometimes items are found hanging exactly where they were left, as if waiting for hands that never returned. Up ahead, the path dips, and you step down into a small clearing ringed by banyan trees. In the center lies a collection of objects, a few cracked rifle stocks, a rusted entrenching tool, the warped frame of what might have been a stretcher. They're scattered, but not in the chaotic way you'd expect from battle. It's more like someone placed them here deliberately, a quiet memorial no one talks about. The air feels heavier in the clearing, thick enough that you find yourself taking shallower breaths. Somewhere in the trees you hear a sound, a steady, hollow thump, like wood knocking against wood. It's faint, irregular, and too slow to be an animal. You stand still, listening, but the sound stops the moment you focus on it. You wait, counting seconds, until the jungle offers only silence. And that silence, you realize, is almost worse than the sound. A narrow trail leads out of the clearing, sloping down toward a darker section of the ridge. The light here fades faster, the canopy overhead knitting together until the sky disappears entirely. The ground is uneven, riddled with shallow depressions you try not to step into. Some are no larger than a footprint, others wide enough to hold a man. You don't linger on the thought. When the ridge levels out again, you see a gap ahead where the trees thin just enough to let in a strip of pale light. Beyond it, the land drops into another part of the island, a place where you can just make out the curve of a shoreline. The sight should feel like progress, but instead it feels like a warning, the kind you only recognize once you've already stepped past it. The descent toward the lower ground is slow, the path broken in places by roots thick enough to trip you if you stop paying attention. The light filters through the canopy in narrow shafts, striping the ground in golden shadow. You keep your eyes on the trail, but every now and then, movement catches in your peripheral vision. Something small darting between the undergrowth, always gone when you turn your head. It could be lizards. It could be something else. Here, you've learned not to make assumptions. Halfway down, you find a rusted barrel wedged against the base of a tree. Its sides are dented, and a jagged tear runs along one edge, like it exploded from the inside. You step closer and see faded stenciling, numbers and letters too worn to read. Historians are still debating whether barrels like this once held fuel, water, or something more dangerous. In a place like this, any of the three could have been a liability, and all three could have been deadly. The path curves, and suddenly the jungle opens into a shallow basin. Here the air is thick and still, as if the wind refuses to cross the invisible line that separates this place from the rest of the island. At the center of the basin, half hidden in the soil, lies the remains of a mortar. Its barrel collapsed, the base plate buried under moss. You've seen photos of these in wartime archives, often surrounded by spent shell casings. Here there's nothing, just the weapon, abandoned like it lost the will to fight. Near the mortar you notice something odd, a patch of earth darker than the rest, the soil uneven as if it's been disturbed. You kneel, brushing away leaves, and uncover the corner of a wooden crate. The lid is gone, the interior empty, save for a single glass bottle lying on its side. The label has peeled away, but inside is a cloudy liquid that shifts lazily when you tilt it. You think about the stories of improvised explosives, of field medicine stored alongside ammunition, and decide to set it back exactly where you found it. A rustling sound pulls your attention toward the far side of the basin, where the tree roots twist into strange shapes. For a moment, it looks almost like the curve of a rib cage, bleached and tangled in the earth. You know it's just wood, but the illusion is strong enough to make you glance around, suddenly aware of how quiet the place has become. The jungle beyond the basin is dense, and the shadows there feel heavier than the ones you've walked through before. You take a slow step forward and feel something give under your boot, a soft crunch, brittle and hollow. You lift your foot to see what's left of a canteen, its metal split into curling edges. The interior is coated in a thin layer of reddish brown, not rust, but something dried long ago. You tell yourself it could be dirt, though the thought doesn't settle easily. Some objects you realize carry stories you might be better off not knowing. The far edge of the basin rises into another narrow path, and you follow it, climbing until the air begins to move again. A faint breeze brushes past your face, carrying with it the smell of salt. Somewhere ahead, the sea is waiting, but as the jungle parts, you see more than the shoreline. You see the jagged remains of a pier, half collapsed into the water, its supports rotting and slick with algae. From here, the ocean looks deceptively calm, its surface silver in the muted light. The pier leads out into it like a finger pointing towards something unseen. You have the distinct feeling that if you were to walk it, you might not come back. And still, the pull is there, quiet but insistent, like the island is offering you one more step deeper into its story. You follow the shoreline, keeping a cautious distance from the broken pier. The sand here is darker, damp even above the tide line, and littered with fragments of metal that glint dully in the weak light. Some are bent beyond recognition, others still hold their shape. Belt buckles, the curved guard of a bayonet, a dented mess tin. Each piece feels like it belongs to a puzzle you're not supposed to solve, one that only the island knows how to finish. Farther along, you come across a cluster of barrels, half submerged in the sand. They're corroded and split, their contents long since washed away. One has rolled into the surf, and with each wave it knocks softly against the others, the sound hollow and strangely rhythmic. It reminds you of that odd fact about ocean buoys ringing themselves in storms, how the sea has its own music if you know how to listen. Here, though, the tune is off-key, unsettling in its uneven timing. A little further up the beach, you find the skeletal frame of a small boat, the ribs jutting upward like the bones of an animal picked clean. Seaweed clings to the wood, and barnacles have claimed every available surface. You can almost picture the boat in its last moments, caught in a sudden swell, tipping just enough for the sea to pour in faster than it could be bailed out. Historians are still debating whether this was a civilian fishing craft pressed into service during the war, or part of a supply run that never reached its destination. Beyond the boat, a scatter of crates lies half buried in the sand. Most are empty, their lids long gone, but one is still sealed with rusted nails. The wood is soft to the touch, crumbling when you press your fingers against it. You think about prying it open, but the way it sags under its own weight makes you hesitate. There's something about a box that's been closed for decades. You can never be sure if it's protecting what's inside or keeping it from getting out. The shoreline bends and you come upon a section where the land has collapsed into the sea, the erosion exposing layers of soil and stone. Embedded in the wall are fragments of metal, glass, and bone. You stop and stare, trying to decide if what you're seeing is exactly what it looks like. A wave crashes against the base, and when it pulls away, a piece of fabric flutters briefly in the wash before settling back into place. It's enough to make you step away without thinking. You keep moving, and the beach narrows until the tide nearly reaches the tree line. Here, in the shadow of the jungle, you spot something strange. A single chair, its legs half buried in sand, facing the ocean. The wood is bleached and splintered, the seat covered in lichen. There's no sign of who placed it here or why it hasn't been swept away. It sits like a silent witness, holding its position as the years and tides roll past. The sound of the surf changes again. No longer the even rush of waves, but a steady, rolling hiss, like water moving through something hollow. You follow it until you see a gap in the sand, a place where the beach gives way to a small cave at the base of a cliff. The entrance is half covered by driftwood, but there's enough space to squeeze through. A faint smell drifts out, salt, rot, and something else you can't quite place. You stand at the threshold, the cave's mouth yawning dark in front of you. The tide will be coming in soon, and you know caves like this can flood quickly. But something about the way the sound echoes from inside makes it feel less like water and more like breathing. You take one slow step forward, feeling the cool air on your skin, and realize the island isn't done showing you its secrets. Not yet. You duck under the driftwood and step into the cave, the daylight behind you shrinking into a thin, wavering outline. Inside, the air is cooler, damp enough that beads of moisture cling to the walls like sweat. The floor is uneven, a mix of smooth rock and patches of sand that squish softly under your boots. Each step sends a faint echo bouncing through the cavern, as if the space is taking note of your arrival. A few yards in, the light from the entrance fades, replaced by the muted glow of bioluminescent algae clinging to the wet stone. The green-blue shimmer is faint but steady, painting everything in a ghostly hue. You've read that some coastal caves in the Pacific glow like this during certain times of year, the result of plankton and bacteria blooming in the dark. Historians still debate whether these caves were used for storage during the war or avoided altogether, their strange light unsettling to superstitious eyes. The tunnel narrows, forcing you to stoop. The ceiling drips steadily, each drop striking the rock with the same rhythm over and over until it almost becomes background noise. But beneath it, you catch another sound, softer, irregular, like fabric brushing against stone. You pause, listening, but the sound stops as if it knows it's been noticed. Your flashlight cuts through the dim, catching on something metallic ahead. As you get closer, you see it's a rusted helmet, wedged between two rocks as though it rolled here during a flood and never made it out again. Inside, a small crab shifts, its shell painted in faint stripes that look eerily like the insignia you've seen on wartime artifacts. You blink, and the pattern is gone. It's just a crab, nothing more. At least, that's what you tell yourself. Further in, the walls widen just enough to reveal a small alcove. Here, a collection of objects lies half buried in sand. A canteen with its strap still attached, a knife with the blades snapped in half, and a cluster of small glass bottles. One bottle is intact, its cork still wedged tightly in place. You pick it up and feel the faint slosh of liquid inside. The glass is cloudy, and the contents are a pale amber. You don't uncork it. At the far end of the cave, the floor drops into a pool of still dark water. The surface is mirror smooth, reflecting the glow of the algae above. You kneel at the edge, careful not to disturb it, and see shapes beneath, indistinct at first, then sharpening into outlines. Some look like rocks, others, not so much. The water is too dark to see clearly, and the longer you stare, the less you want to know for certain. A faint rumble shivers through the rock, and you glance toward the entrance. The tide is shifting, the sound of waves now louder, closer. You stand, moving back through the narrow tunnel, your own footsteps chasing you in the echoes. The bioluminescence fades as the daylight grows, and soon you're ducking back under the driftwood into the open air. Outside, the sun is lower, the light slanting across the beach in long shadows. The cave sits behind you like a mouth that is closed around something it doesn't want to share. You turn away, brushing sand from your boots, and head toward the jungle once more. The island still has ground left to show you, and it's not the kind that lets you leave without taking something with you. The jungle swallows you again, the canopy overhead knitting so tightly that the light fades to a muted green gloom. The path is barely visible, just a faint depression in the earth that weaves between towering trunks and tangled undergrowth. Every few steps, you hear the distant crash of waves against the far side of the island, a dull, rhythmic pulse that feels more like a heartbeat than surf. It's enough to make you wonder if the island is listening to its own pulse, just as it's been listening to you. You push aside a curtain of vines and find yourself staring at a collapsed bunker. The structure has been cracked wide open, its concrete walls split like a crushed seashell. Inside, the floor is littered with twisted rebar, scattered bolts, and a jumble of unrecognizable metal shapes. You've read that many of these bunkers were designed to withstand direct artillery fire, but nature is patient in a way armies can never be. The jungle doesn't attack. It infiltrates, waits, and pulls everything down from the inside out. A few steps closer, you spot a faded insignia painted on the bunker wall. It's almost gone, just a ghost of color clinging to the rough surface. The design is hard to make out, a circle maybe, with the faint suggestion of wings or a crest. Historians still debate whether this symbol marked a command post or a supply station. Some argue it was improvised, painted in haste when the tide of battle shifted. You wonder if the soldier who painted it thought it would survive longer than they did. The air inside the broken bunker is cooler, still carrying a hint of smoke that can't possibly be fresh. In one corner, a pile of corroded shells rests beneath a slab of fallen concrete, the tips dulled with age. You crouch, tracing your fingers along the casing of one, and the metal leaves a faint red smear on your skin. Rust, nothing more. And yet, you wipe it away quickly, as if the years between then and now could collapse in a heartbeat. On the far wall, a jagged opening leads into a narrow side chamber. You squeeze through and find a single wooden crate sitting in the shadows. The lid is split, and the contents are visible. Glass jars, some still sealed, filled with what looks like dried food or grain. A strange fact comes to mind. Some preserved rations from W2 are still technically edible, though no one sane would risk it. You take a step back, imagining what kind of hunger it would take to try. Stepping outside again, you notice the jungle floor here is uneven, the earth sloping sharply toward a hollow choked with ferns. At the bottom, you can see the edge of another structure, half buried and barely visible through the greenery. Its entrance faces away from you, and for a moment, you consider skirting around to see inside. But the path to it is steep and slick, the kind that could send you sliding into a place you might not be able to climb out of. A breeze cuts through the trees, carrying a sound you can't quite place, low, drawn out, and distant. It's not the crash of waves nor the rush of wind. It's slower, heavier, and it fades before you can tell which direction it came from. The silence that follows feels heavier than before, as if the island is waiting for you to decide whether you'll keep going. You keep walking, your boots crunching over leaves and twigs, the bunker fading into the shadows behind you. Every step seems to lead you deeper into a place where the air is thicker, the light dimmer, and the past closer. Somewhere ahead, there's a point where all of this will stop feeling like exploration and start feeling like trespass. The trail narrows until it's nothing more than a thin thread cutting through the undergrowth. Ferns brush against your arms, leaving a damp film on your skin, and roots twist across the path like a series of traps laid by something patient. The air is heavy with the smell of wet leaves, but underneath it is another scent, faint, metallic, and oddly sweet, the kind you notice more with the back of your throat than your nose. You've learned not to ignore smells like that. The path dips into a shallow gully where water seeps from the hillside in thin, glistening rivulets. Half submerged in the mud is the warped frame of a bicycle, its tires rotted away, spokes bent at impossible angles. It's an absurd sight here, in the middle of a jungle that never knew paved roads. Historians are still debating whether bicycles like this were used to carry messages between outposts or if it belonged to one of the island's civilians before the war swallowed everything. Either way, its journey ended in this ditch. Just beyond the gully, you find a stretch of ground that looks almost sculpted. Two parallel lines, perfectly straight, cutting through the earth before disappearing into the jungle. You crouch and brush away leaves to reveal strips of rusted metal. It takes a moment to realize what you're looking at. The remnants of narrow-gauge rails, the kind used to move supplies or ammunition. The rails vanish into the undergrowth ahead, swallowed by roots, as if the jungle itself was determined to erase every route that led to this place. Following the rails feels instinctive, even though the path is uneven and overgrown. You pass a tangle of vines that's grown over a stack of crates, their edges still sharp beneath the green covering. One crate has split open, spilling its contents. Metal canisters the size of a man's forearm, all dented and corroded. Some are missing their caps, their hollow mouths yawning at you like empty sockets. You don't touch them. Even after all these years, there are some things that shouldn't be handled. The rails finally end at the lip of a small clearing, where a flat concrete slab lies half buried in the soil. Its surface is cracked, weeds sprouting from every fissure. At one corner, a rusted hatch sits slightly ajar, revealing a darkness that swallows your flashlight beam almost instantly. You can feel the cooler air spilling out of it, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and dust. It smells like a place that hasn't been opened in decades. You circle the slab and find faded lettering along one edge, illegible in places, but you can make out a few words: storage and restricted. It's the kind of warning that would have meant something once. Now it's just a suggestion, and one the island clearly doesn't care to enforce anymore. The jungle presses close around the clearing, as if forming a wall to keep this spot hidden. It's quiet here, too quiet, with not even the buzz of insects to fill the air. You glance back the way you came, but the path is already disappearing into the green. For a moment, it feels like you've stepped into a space the island didn't expect you to find. You stand at the edge of the hatch, looking down into that unmoving dark. There's a weight in the air here, something that makes your shoulders tighten and your pulse slow. You tell yourself you're not going down there, not yet, but the truth is, you've already taken a step closer. The first step down into the hatch is slick with moss, forcing you to grip the rusted frame for balance. The air that rises from below is cooler, denser, and carries a musty tang, like an attic that hasn't been opened in generations. Your flashlight beam cuts a thin path through the darkness, illuminating a steep set of concrete steps. They descend at an angle so sharp you can't see where they end. Somewhere down there, water drips with slow, deliberate patience. As you go lower, the light from the hatch fades, replaced entirely by the pale cone of your flashlight. The walls here are rough and damp, beads of moisture sliding down their surface. About halfway down, you spot a patch of faded paint on the wall, a line of numbers and letters you can't make out fully, but the stenciled style is unmistakable. Historians are still debating whether codes like these mark supply points, troop counts, or something more classified. The mystery feels heavier in a place like this, where the air is thick enough to taste. At the base of the stairs, the space widens into a rectangular chamber. Shelves line the walls, though most have collapsed under their own weight. The floor is scattered with debris, shards of glass, twisted bits of metal, scraps of cloth long since turned to dust. In one corner, a cluster of intact jars sits on a surviving shelf. The glass is cloudy, and inside some are filled with a yellowed powder, others with a thick amber liquid. You don't open them. The island has taught you that some things are better left sealed. A large metal drum lies on its side near the far wall, its surface dented and scored. Your light catches on something smeared across it. At first you think it's rust, but it's darker, uneven. You brush the thought aside, telling yourself it's just another stain in a place full of them. Still, you give the drum a wide berth as you move past. In the center of the chamber, a wooden crate rests on a pair of concrete blocks, as if someone wanted to keep it off the damp floor. The lid is gone, and inside are stacks of papers bound with string. You lift one, and the pages crumble at the edges. Most of the writing is illegible, but you can make out a few fragments. Place names, quantities, and dates from the final months of the war. Whoever kept these records must have known how close things were to ending. There's a doorway at the far end of the chamber, leading into a smaller room. Here the shelves are empty, but the floor holds something unexpected. A neat pile of personal items. A rusted wristwatch, its hands frozen at 317. A pair of eyeglasses, the lenses cracked. A small tin with the paint worn away, rattling faintly when you shake it. These aren't military supplies. They're the kind of things someone might carry every day. The stillness in this room is absolute, so complete that you hear your own heartbeat. You take a step back, feeling the weight of the air press in. There's no sound of animals here, no whisper of wind through cracks in the walls. It's as if this place has been holding its breath for decades, waiting for someone to remember it exists. And now that someone is you. You turn back toward the stairs, your flashlight catching the wet gleam of the steps ahead. The climb feels slower than the descent, each step pulling you further away from whatever the island keeps in its hidden rooms. When you emerge back into the daylight, the jungle sounds rush to greet you, birds calling, leaves rustling, the world resuming its normal pace. But in the back of your mind, you can still hear the quiet from below, and it's louder than anything around you. The jungle seems brighter after the hatch, almost too bright, as if the island is trying to pretend nothing happened. You stand for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, feeling the sweat on your back evaporate in the humid air. But the silence around the clearing isn't quite right. It's not the full, heavy stillness of the underground chamber. It's thinner, watchful, like the moment before someone finishes a sentence you don't want to hear. You take the narrow path leading away from the hatch, winding through a grove of palms whose trunks lean at sharp, unnatural angles. The ground here is soft, sinking slightly under your weight. It takes a few steps before you realize why. The soil is pitted with shallow depressions, irregular in size and shape. Some are no bigger than your hand. Others look wide enough for a man to curl up in. You tell yourself they're just sinkholes, but the idea doesn't settle. Midway through the grove, you come across the remnants of a wooden cart. Its frame is splintered, one wheel missing entirely, the other half buried in the dirt. On the cart's flatbed lies a rusted metal pail, filled to the brim with small jagged stones. You can't tell if they were gathered for building, for defense, or simply abandoned in place. Historians are still debating whether carts like these were used by soldiers or by locals pressed into service. The island, as always, keeps its answer to itself. The path opens onto a rise that overlooks a section of the coastline. From here, you can see the jagged remains of another pier, this one completely collapsed into the water. The sea laps gently against the wreckage, but the pattern of the waves is wrong. They break in uneven bursts, as if hitting something just beneath the surface. You scan the water and catch glimpses of dark shapes, but they vanish before you can be sure of what they are. Turning back toward the jungle, you notice a faint trail branching away from the main path. It's narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and choked with low branches. You duck under them, following the trail until it widens into a small clearing. At its center lies a single helmet, perfectly upright, with no rust, no dents, untouched by time in a way that feels impossible here. The sight stops you cold. Everything else on the island has been claimed by decay. But this looks like it was placed here yesterday. You step closer, and the air around the helmet feels cooler, the breeze stronger. For a moment, you think you hear something faint, murmuring, too low to make out words. You crouch, your hand hovering above the steel, but you don't touch it. Whatever this is, it doesn't belong to you. The murmuring fades as you stand, replaced by the distant rush of waves. Leaving the clearing, you rejoin the main path, which dips downhill toward another dense stretch of trees. The light narrows again, filtering down in thin columns that seem to follow you. You pass a cluster of roots twisted into a shape that looks almost human, a suggestion of arms raised toward the canopy. You keep walking, not looking back. When the jungle finally opens once more, you find yourself facing a low ridge leading inland. The slope is rocky, the surface uneven, but beyond it lies something you can't quite see, a shadow that hints at a structure. And though you can't hear anything from here, you feel certain that whatever's beyond that ridge has been waiting. You climb the ridge slowly, the rocks shifting slightly under your boots. Each step brings a wider view of the interior of the island, a landscape where the jungle seems to ripple in uneven waves, broken only by jagged outcrops of stone. The air is hotter here, trapped under the canopy and held in place by the ridge's high shoulders. Sweat trickles down your spine, and every breath feels like it's drawing in the weight of decades. At the top, the trees thin just enough to reveal what lies beyond, a series of trenches carved directly into the coral bedrock. They snake across the ground in sharp angles, each segment disappearing behind walls of moss and vine. You've read about these kinds of fortifications, how they were sometimes hacked out by hand, picks and shovels striking sparks from the stone in the dead of night. Historians are still debating whether these were part of the original plan for the island's defense, or a desperate attempt to hold the high ground as the enemy advanced. You drop down into one of the trenches, your boots scraping against the rough coral walls. It's narrower than you expected, forcing you to move in a crouch. The floor is uneven, littered with fallen leaves and the occasional gleam of rusted metal. At one bend, a bayonet blade lies wedged between two stones, the handle cracked but still clinging to the tang. You think about taking it, but the way it sits, half hidden, half watching, makes you leave it where it is. Farther along, the trench widens into a small command pit. The remains of wooden planks are scattered here, the rotted frames of what might have been tables or benches. In the corner, you spot a faded canvas bag, its straps fused together by rust from the buckles. You open the flap carefully, revealing a jumble of papers, all waterlogged and fused into a single mass. The top sheet peels away under your fingers, showing a map so faded it's more ghost than ink. The trench continues past the pit, winding toward a section where the walls are higher, the shadows deeper. You notice the smell before you reach it, musty, metallic, with a sour undertone that makes you breathe through your mouth. The air here is cooler, the light dimmer, as if the trench is leading you not just forward, but back in time. You pass a rusted ammo box sitting open, its hinges frozen in place. Inside are only a few scattered rounds, their casings green with corrosion. One of them has split open along the side, the powder inside hardened into an irregular lump. You remember reading about ammunition from this era, occasionally becoming unstable, even decades later. You step carefully, avoiding brushing against the box. Eventually, the trench ends at a steep incline where the walls have collapsed inward. You climb out, finding yourself on a narrow ridge overlooking the opposite slope. Down below, the jungle is denser, the foliage darker. A narrow trail winds through it, disappearing into the shadows as if the forest itself is swallowing it. You stand for a moment, catching your breath. looking at the trail and wondering where it leads. Something about it feels deliberate, as though it was meant to be hidden, known only to those who were here when the island was still alive with the noise of battle. And now, standing here alone, you realize you're about to follow it. You descend the ridge slowly, the trail narrowing until the foliage brushes against both shoulders. The ground is damp, the soil dark and spongy underfoot, each step releasing the smell of wet leaves and earth. Somewhere above, a bird calls once, sharp, sudden, and then the jungle falls quiet again. You've learned by now that on this island, silence often means you're about to see something you can't unsee. The path flattens out into a shaded hollow where the air feels noticeably cooler. Here, the vegetation parts just enough to reveal a long, low structure, almost swallowed by the undergrowth. At first glance, it looks like another collapsed hut, but as you get closer, you realize the walls are made of thick timber, reinforced with rusting steel plates. It's a storage shed, or at least it used to be. Historians still debate whether these sheds were meant for food, ammunition, or something more dangerous. The shed's roof has caved in, letting shafts of sunlight spill through, catching on the dust and pollen hanging in the air. Inside, the floor is littered with debris, warped boards, twisted wire, and fragments of glass bottles. Against the far wall, you spot the remnants of a wooden crate still bearing faint stenciled markings in a language you don't recognize. Most of the lettering has flaked away, but the date is still clear, 1944. You step over a collapsed beam and crouch beside the crate. Inside, the contents are a jumble. Metal canisters about the size of your fist, their surfaces mottled with corrosion. One of them has a deep dent in its side, and the cap is missing. You don't touch it. Even after decades, you know some relics can still bite. Near the entrance, a long-handled tool leans against the wall. The wooden shaft is cracked and splintered, the metal head dull but intact. It's a pickaxe, the kind used for digging fortifications or clearing rock. You think about the hands that must have gripped it, the hours of labor spent carving trenches, tunnels, and defensive positions into this island. It's strange to imagine such effort poured into a place that would end up abandoned. A sudden shift in the air draws your attention to the corner of the shed. A small section of the floor has collapsed, revealing a dark gap beneath. You kneel, shining your flashlight inside, and see the start of a narrow tunnel sloping downward into shadow. The earth here is shored up with wooden beams, most still holding despite the years. You wonder if it's a storage cellar or an escape route. Historians are still split on how many tunnels were dug on islands like this, and how many of them were ever found after the war ended. You linger for a moment, the cool air from the gap brushing against your face. Something about it makes you uneasy, not because it feels dangerous, but because it feels deliberate, as though the tunnel is waiting for someone to use it again. You step back, deciding to leave it for now. The island has a way of guiding you to places when it's ready. As you turn to leave the shed, your boot knocks against something half buried in the dirt. You stoop to pull it free, brushing away the soil to reveal a small tin box. The hinges creak as you open it, revealing a few coins, a rusted key, and a photograph curled with age. The image is faded, the face is barely visible, but the background is unmistakable. It's this island. You close the box gently, slipping it back where you found it. Some things you decide are meant to stay here. Leaving the shed behind, you follow the trail as it twists deeper into the jungle, the air growing heavier with every step. The light here is fractured, splintered by layers of leaves so thick they feel almost solid overhead. The ground is uneven, studded with roots that rise and fall like the bones of some long-buried creature. Each time your boot catches on one, you can't shake the feeling that the island is deliberately slowing you down. The path eventually narrows until it disappears altogether, forcing you to push through the undergrowth. That's when you see it, half hidden under vines and ferns, a low circular wall of stone. At first it looks like the remnants of a well, but as you clear away the greenery, you realize it's too wide, too shallow. You've read about structures like this in wartime accounts. Mortar pits, dug to house heavy artillery that could rotate and fire in all directions. Historians still debate whether this one ever saw combat or if it was abandoned before it was used. Inside the pit, the ground is littered with small metal fragments, shards of shell casings, a bent hinge, a strip of leather so brittle it crumbles when you touch it. In the center lies a circular steel plate, pitted with rust but still solid, its bolts frozen in place. You picture soldiers here in the rain, working under dim lantern light, each movement echoing into the jungle, while somewhere beyond the tree line, the enemy was closing in. A faint metallic glint catches your eye along the pit's edge. You dig carefully through the leaves and find a small object, an insignia pin, its surface tarnished but the design still visible. A pair of wings flanking a sword. The image stirs something familiar in your memory, though you can't place where you've seen it before. You slip it back into the soil, pressing the leaves over it. Not everything needs to follow you home. Climbing out of the pit, you notice a series of shallow depressions in the ground leading away into the trees. They're evenly spaced, the size of footprints, but too deep to belong to any animal you can think of. They lead toward a gap in the foliage, and curiosity pushes you to follow. The gap opens into a small glade where the light feels strangely muted, even though the canopy is thinner here. In the center of the clearing stands a single wooden post, weathered and cracked, with a loop of frayed rope hanging from it. The ground around the post is bare, the soil darker than the surrounding earth. You've seen photos of makeshift flagpoles like this in forward bases, but this one carries no flag, no markings, just the weight of something left behind. You step closer and the breeze shifts, carrying a sudden burst of sound, the distant crack of something falling, or maybe breaking, somewhere deeper in the jungle. It's faint, but enough to make you turn toward it. The sound doesn't come again, but the air feels charged now, like the seconds before lightning strikes. The trail out of the glade is narrow, barely a suggestion of a path, but you take it anyway. The jungle presses in close, the smell of damp wood and earth filling your lungs. Each step feels heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from the growing sense that you're being drawn towards something the island has been hiding in plain sight. The path tightens into a tunnel of green, the leaves brushing against your arms and face as if testing your resolve. The air is warmer here, heavier, and each breath feels like it carries the taste of copper. You push forward, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil, until the tunnel abruptly spills you into a hollow where the jungle has thinned just enough to let the light in. It's not much, just a pale, muted glow, but it's enough to reveal what waits ahead. At the center of the hollow stands a rusted anti-aircraft gun, its barrel tilted toward the sky, as though still searching for a target. Vines snake up its frame, wrapping the legs in green coils, but the weapon's shape is unmistakable. The steel is mottled with patches of deep orange corrosion, and the seats are missing entirely, as if ripped away. You've read that weapons like this were often abandoned in place when the battle turned, their crews melting into the jungle. Historians still debate whether this one ever fired in combat or was silenced before it could. Around the gun lie scattered shell casings, most half buried in the soil. You kneel to pick one up and find it heavier than you expected, the metal cold despite the heat of the day. The base still carries faint markings, numbers and letters stamped deep enough to survive decades. You set it back where it lay, unwilling to take even this small piece from a place that feels more like a memorial than a ruin. Beyond the gun, a shallow trench curves along the edge of the hollow. You follow it, tracing the way it dips and rises, until you find a spot where the wall has collapsed. Here you see something unusual, a cluster of stones carefully arranged in a circle. In the center, a single steel helmet rests upside down, filled with rainwater and a layer of rotting leaves. It looks intentional, almost ceremonial, as if someone placed it here long after the fighting had ended. You stand for a while listening to the faint sounds of the jungle beyond the hollow. A breeze moves through the leaves, carrying with it a low, steady hum you can't quite place. It's not the sound of insects. It's deeper, more mechanical, and it fades the moment you take a step toward it. You wait, but it doesn't return. Circling back toward the gun, you notice a narrow path leading out the far side of the hollow. It's barely visible, more an absence of undergrowth than a trail, but something about it feels deliberate. The ground there is firmer, packed flat as if by many feet over time. You hesitate, scanning the shadows, but there's nothing to see, only the pull of whatever lies ahead. As you step onto the new path, the air shifts again, cooler now, with the faint smell of salt. You can hear the ocean somewhere in the distance, its rhythm slow and even. The sound is steady enough to be calming, but there's an edge to it, an undertone that makes you wonder if you're heading toward the shore, or something that only pretends to be it. The path bends sharply, forcing you to push past a wall of vines so thick they snag at your sleeves. Beyond them, the jungle floor drops into a shallow basin, the air immediately cooler and carrying the faint smell of brine. You can hear the ocean now, close but muffled, like it's speaking through a closed door. The sound comes in slow, steady pulses, each one followed by a faint hiss that doesn't quite match the rhythm of the waves. At the far edge of the basin, the trees thin enough for you to see a break in the land. The ground slopes toward a narrow inlet, its water dark and still. The shoreline here is jagged, lined with sharp coral outcroppings that jut into the water like teeth. In the center of the inlet, the remains of a boat sit half submerged, its bow tilted upward at an unnatural angle. You've read that many small craft like this were scuttled intentionally during the war to block harbors and inlets. Historians still debate whether this one was sacrificed to keep enemies out or to keep something in. You step carefully down the slope, the soil loose under your boots. Near the water's edge, you spot a cluster of objects tangled in the roots of a mangrove tree, a rusted mess tin, a length of chain, a pair of boots so stiff with age they could stand on their own. One boot still has a fragment of sock inside, the fabric brittle enough to crumble at a touch. You leave it alone, feeling the prickle of eyes on your back, even though you know you're alone. The boat is close enough that you can wade to it, but the water is murky, and the dark shapes beneath the surface move just enough to make you hesitate. Instead, you circle the inlet, scanning the shoreline. Along the far side, you find a section where the coral has been blasted away, leaving a low wall of rubble. Embedded in the rubble are fragments of metal, hinges, bolts, and something curved that looks disturbingly like the rim of a helmet. You follow the rubble wall until it ends at a crude stone jetty, just wide enough for one person to walk. The stones are slick with algae, but still hold the warmth of the sun under your boots. Halfway along, you notice a metal post driven deep into the stone. A length of heavy rope dangles from it, frayed at the end as if something once hung there and was cut free. You imagine what might have been tethered, another boat, a cargo net, or something that doesn't bear thinking about. At the jetty's end, the water deepens into a pool that reflects the sky in perfect clarity. It's beautiful, almost enough to make you forget where you are. But then, just as you're about to turn away, the surface ripples, not from wind, not from a falling leaf, but from something rising slowly just beneath. The shape never fully breaks the surface before sinking again, vanishing into the dark. You step back from the edge, the rope swaying slightly behind you. Whatever it was, it's gone now. But the inlet feels smaller suddenly, the air heavier, as though the island has just reminded you that nothing here is ever truly still. You turn toward the path again, the sound of the ocean now loud in your ears, following you as you climb back toward the trees. The path leads you away from the inlet, climbing steadily until the smell of brine fades into the heavier scent of wet earth and old leaves. The jungle closes in again, its canopy filtering the sunlight into a dull green haze. Here the air feels stiller, the kind that presses close around you, making each breath slow and deliberate. You hear the faint snap of a twig somewhere off to your right, but when you stop, the sound dies with you. The trail levels out onto a narrow plateau where the ground has been flattened almost unnaturally even. At its center sits a large concrete slab, cracked but still solid. A ring of rusted steel stakes protrudes from its edges, connected by fragments of wire. You've read about sites like this, platforms for signal towers or anti-aircraft guns. But the dimensions here don't quite fit. Historians still debate whether platforms like this served a single purpose or were improvised for whatever the moment demanded. On one side of the slab, a small pile of debris catches your eye. Bent nails, bits of broken glass, the frame of a lantern with its glass long gone. The base of the lantern is blackened, as if it burned far longer than it should have. You imagine it casting light over this clearing in the middle of the night, illuminating faces that were never meant to be seen clearly. A faint path branches off to the left, leading to a pair of upright posts leaning toward each other. A length of frayed cable dangles between them, its ends buried in the soil. You brush aside the leaves at the base of one post, and find a corroded metal box, its lid warped but still clinging by a hinge. Inside, there's a spool of wire, some pieces still coiled tight, others broken into jagged ends. It looks like communications gear, though far too crude to have lasted long in the field. Returning to the slab, you notice a section where the concrete has crumbled away, revealing a hollow space beneath. The gap is too narrow to crawl through, but you can see the outline of something metallic just inside. Smooth, curved, and large enough to be a container of some kind. You try to shine your light deeper, but the beam fades into the dust and shadow. Whatever it is, the island seems content to keep it just out of reach. A shift in the breeze carries a smell you haven't noticed before. Smoke, faint but sharp enough to cut through the damp. It's the scent of something burned recently, though there's no fire here. The sensation is unsettling, like stepping into a room where a candle has just been snuffed out. You scan the trees, but the jungle only stares back. You step off the slab and follow the trail leading out of the plateau, the wire stakes vanishing into the undergrowth behind you. The air feels heavier now, the shadows thicker, and the sound of the ocean is gone entirely. Whatever lies ahead, it isn't the sea, it's something deeper, and the island has been slowly guiding you toward it from the moment you stepped ashore. The trail slopes downward, curling between tree trunks so wide you could hide behind them completely. The ground is softer here, layered with decades of fallen leaves that muffle your footsteps. The light is dim and tinted gold, as though the sun has to squeeze through too many layers of air to reach you. You start to notice small shapes scattered along the path, short sections of pipe, rusted hinges, and pieces of what look like shattered porcelain. They're not clustered, they just appear every few steps, like breadcrumbs left for someone willing to follow. At a bend in the path, you come upon a collapsed structure. Only the foundations remain, low walls of coral stone and concrete, their edges softened by moss. It takes a moment to piece it together, but you recognize the layout. Barracks. You've seen similar blueprints in old wartime manuals. Rows of bunks, a narrow walkway, a small open space that might have served as a mess area. Historians still debate whether the barracks on outlying islands like this were for soldiers stationed permanently or for those passing through before combat elsewhere. You step into what must have been the main room. The floor is carpeted with ferns, but the corners still hold traces of the past. A boot heel half buried in the soil, the rusted skeleton of a folding cot, a dented canteen with a hole clean through its side. You lift the canteen and turn it over in your hand, wondering if the hole came from a bullet or just the slow, patient work of time. Either way, it's a reminder that nothing here has escaped damage. In the far corner, a section of the wall has collapsed, leaving a gap that leads into a narrow side room. Here, the debris is piled higher, and the air smells faintly of mildew and salt. Against one wall sits a crate with its lid split open. Inside are several glass jars, their lids still sealed. The contents are unrecognizable. Dark, murky shapes floating in liquid gone cloudy with age. You don't linger over them. Beside the crate, something catches your eye. A playing card, face down, its edges curled from moisture. You flip it over to reveal the Queen of Hearts, the design faded but still visible. It feels too clean, too intact to have been here for decades, but the dust clinging to it says otherwise. You place it back exactly where you found it, resisting the urge to take it as proof. You step outside and notice a faint track leading away from the barracks toward a dense cluster of palms. The ground here is marked with shallow impressions, like something heavy was dragged through recently. The prints are too irregular to be from a vehicle, but too deep to be from a single person on foot. Whatever made them, it didn't seem concerned about covering its path. Following the track, you arrive at a small clearing where the earth dips into a shallow depression. In the center lies a rusted metal frame, the remnants of a stretcher, its canvas rotted away. One of the handles is splintered, the other bent at a sharp angle. You can almost see the shape of someone being carried here, the rush of footsteps through the undergrowth, the low murmur of voices in a language you can't understand. The path continues beyond the clearing, narrower now, the vegetation pressing in so close it feels like a tunnel. The air grows warmer, the scent of the jungle deepening into something richer, darker. You can't see far ahead, but the shadows move differently here, slower, heavier, like the island is breathing just a little too close to your neck. The tunnel of vegetation leads you to a place where the jungle abruptly falls away, opening into a wide sunlit field. It's startling after so many hours in the dim green shadows, and for a moment you have to squint against the sudden glare. The grass here grows waist-high in uneven clumps, swaying gently in the breeze. From a distance, it looks peaceful, almost inviting. But the longer you stand there, the more you realize that the field feels wrong. Too quiet, too still. You step forward slowly, the grass parting in soft rustles around your legs. The ground beneath is firmer than expected, with a hollow, almost drum-like sound when you shift your weight. It's the kind of resonance you'd hear walking over planks or a thin shell of earth. You've read accounts of soldiers covering pits or bunkers with dirt and grass to hide them from above. Historians still debate whether such fields were for ambush, concealment, or burial. A few paces in, you notice dark shapes breaking the surface. Metal posts jutting at odd angles, their tops bent and jagged. Some are no more than a foot high, others almost to your knee. They form no clear pattern, but they're too deliberately placed to be random. As you pass one, you see that it's not a post at all, but the leg of an overturned table, the wood long rotted away. At the center of the field, you find a circular patch where the grass refuses to grow. The soil here is pale, almost gray, and littered with small fragments of ceramic and glass. You crouch to pick one up and realize it's the handle of a cup. It's porcelain chipped, but still smooth under your fingers. You drop it back into the dirt and step away, uneasy without knowing why. A sudden gust of wind ripples across the field, flattening the grass in waves that move toward you, like something sweeping across the surface just beneath. You stand still, watching the motion until it stops a few feet away. There's no sound now but your own breathing, loud in your ears. On the far side of the field, you spot a line of low mounds, each about the length of a person. They're subtle, so subtle you wouldn't notice them if the light didn't strike just right. You don't approach, but the shapes fix themselves in your mind. Whether they are what they appear to be is something you'll never know for certain. You skirt the edge of the field, keeping to the shadow of the trees until you find the path again. The air there feels heavier, as if the island itself has drawn a curtain over whatever you just saw. You take one last look at the open space, the grass already swaying as if nothing disturbed it, and then step back into the jungle's embrace. The jungle swallows you again, its canopy closing overhead in a tangle of dark leaves. The path here is barely visible, just a subtle depression in the earth, where roots push up like ribs beneath the surface. Each step sounds too loud against the stillness, like the island is listening. The air smells of wet bark and something faintly metallic, as if a storm had just passed, even though the sky you glimpsed in the field was perfectly clear. After a short climb, you come upon a ridge that overlooks a stretch of the island you haven't seen before. The view is both breathtaking and unsettling, dense forest stretching to the horizon, interrupted by a thin scar of open ground that runs in a perfect line. It looks unnatural, a break in the jungle as straight as if drawn by a ruler. You've read about wartime clearings cut for runways or supply lines, but this one seems too narrow for either. Historians still debate whether such lines were meant for transport or as boundaries for something best kept inside. You make your way down toward it, the incline steep and slick underfoot. The air grows warmer as you descend, and the undergrowth thickens until you have to push it aside with your hands. At the bottom, you find the scar is actually a road, its surface mostly reclaimed by moss and vines, but still faintly recognizable beneath. The asphalt is cracked in long, branching patterns, and here and there, you spot the ghost of faded white paint. Following the road, you notice objects half hidden in the growth, an overturned barrel, the rusted rim of a wheel, and once the skeletal remains of a bicycle frame. Each relic feels strangely out of place, as though they belonged to a time after the war, but were abandoned all the same. You wonder who came here after the fighting ended and why they left. The road leads you to a fork, though one branch has been swallowed entirely by the jungle. The remaining path curves gently until it stops at a small open clearing. In its center stands a concrete structure no higher than your waist, square, with a flat top and a single metal hatch set into it. The hatch is closed, but its surface is streaked with rust and moss, and the handle looks fragile enough to snap at a touch. You crouch, pressing your ear against the cool metal. Nothing. But then as you straighten, you catch it. a whisper of air escaping from somewhere beneath. It's so faint you might have imagined it, yet it carries the unmistakable coolness of a place untouched by the outside for years. You don't open the hatch. Instead, you step back, the thought lingering that this might not be the first time someone stood here and wondered the same thing. You leave the hatch behind, following the road as it narrows into a cracked strip barely wide enough for a single truck. The trees grow taller here, their trunks streaked with lichen, the color of ash. Overhead, a tangle of vines drapes down like heavy curtains, brushing your shoulders as you pass. The air has shifted again. It's warmer, but with a strange, dry edge, like heat radiating from stone that hasn't seen sunlight in decades. Around a bend, you spot a cluster of low buildings, half hidden by the jungle. Their roofs are sagging, walls cracked, but they're unmistakably man-made. The largest structure has a rusted metal door hanging crookedly from its hinges. You step inside, the smell hitting you immediately. Damp wood, old fuel, and something faintly sour. Shafts of light pierce the gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that drift like slow-moving snow. In the center of the room sits a long workbench, covered with tools so rusted they've fused together in places. A wrench lies across a stack of rotted papers, the ink faded to ghostly gray lines. You brush one page gently, revealing a rough diagram of what looks like a map. Jagged coastlines, dotted paths, and a single bold X. Historians still debate whether such crude wartime maps were meant for navigation, or as decoys to mislead whoever found them. At the far end of the room, you find a row of open lockers. Inside, the contents are sparse. A tattered jacket with faded insignia, a pair of boots too small for an adult, and a metal mess tin with a dent that could only have come from a sharp blow. The tin still rattles when you shake it, but you don't open it. Whatever's inside can remain its own secret. Outside, a narrow trail leads away from the buildings toward a ridge. You follow it up, your breath steady but your senses sharpened. At the top, the trees part just enough for you to see the ocean again. Calm, distant, and too far away to explain the salt still lingering in the air. The view would almost be beautiful if not for what lies closer. A small patch of ground cleared of all growth, its soil packed down smooth. In the center of the clearing stands a single object, a wooden crate, lid nails shut, sides covered in faded stencils of letters you can't quite read. One corner has split open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. You crouch to look closer, but before you can, the wind shifts. It's subtle, but you hear something. 3 short knocks, muffled, as if coming from deep underground. You freeze at the sound, your breath caught halfway in your chest. The 3 knocks don't repeat, but the silence afterward feels heavier, as if the jungle itself is holding still to listen. You take a step back from the crate, scanning the clearing. There's no movement, no wind in the trees, no distant rustle of leaves, only the thud of your own heartbeat, loud enough to fill the air. The crate seems ordinary enough on the surface. Weathered wood, rusted nails, and the faded ghost of a stenciled number across one side. You've seen similar containers in wartime supply photos, usually filled with ammunition, rations, or spare parts. But the sound, that doesn't belong to any of those. Historians still debate whether sealed crates left in remote outposts were sometimes booby-trapped, or if they were used for more obscure purposes, best left forgotten. You circle it slowly, noting the way the ground dips slightly around its base, as though it's been here long enough to sink into the soil. At the back, you find a second split in the wood, smaller than the first, just wide enough to glimpse a glint of metal inside. You lean closer, trying to make sense of the shape, but it's too dark to see clearly. A low hum begins somewhere beyond the clearing, a sound so faint you think at first it's in your head. It rises just enough to be felt in your bones before fading away again. When it stops, you realize your hand is still on the crate. You let go quickly, the wood warm under your fingers in a way it shouldn't be. The path out of the clearing slopes downward into thicker jungle, where the air takes on the sharp, damp scent of stone. You follow it, the light dimming until you feel as though you're walking into dusk. Ahead, the trail ends at a sheer rock face, its surface slick with moss. A narrow gap at the base leads into darkness. A cave, small enough that you'll have to crouch to enter. You hesitate listening. Somewhere inside, water drips at irregular intervals, each drop echoing in the stone like a heartbeat. You duck down and step inside, the walls cold and close around you. The floor slopes downward, and with each step, the sound of the dripping water grows sharper, more deliberate, until it almost feels like tapping. At the far end, the passage widens into a cramped chamber. The light from the entrance barely reaches here, but you can make out shapes, rounded stones, piles of debris, and in one corner, a stack of metal canisters. Their lids are sealed tight, and their surfaces are coated in a thin layer of dust. You reach out to brush one clean, but the moment your fingers touch the metal, the tapping stops. The silence that follows is absolute. You stand frozen in the cramped chamber, your hands still hovering over the canister. The air feels heavier now, as though the cave has drawn a deep breath and is holding it. A single bead of condensation slides down the wall beside you, glistening briefly in the dim light before dripping onto the floor. The sound echoes far louder than it should, as if the stone is amplifying every movement you make. You crouch beside the stack of canisters, studying them more closely. They're all the same size, about the length of your forearm, and sealed with thick metal caps that have been crimped shut. Each is stamped with a series of numbers and letters in a style you recognize from wartime munitions. But there's something off about the weight. When you nudge one gently, it doesn't roll easily. It feels almost too dense, as if it's filled with something heavier than water or fuel. Historians still debate whether caches like this contained weapons, or if they were used for experiments the records never mention. In the far corner of the chamber, you spot something partially hidden under a sheet of rotting canvas. Pulling it back releases a cloud of dust and a faint, stale odor, revealing a wooden crate much like the one you saw in the clearing above. This one is intact, but the nails are bent, as if someone once tried to pry it open and gave up. A faint marking runs across the lid, a single hand-painted symbol that looks like an arrow pointing downward. You glance at the cave floor, noticing for the first time a narrow seam running in a circle beneath where the crate sits. The stone here is smoother, worn in a way that doesn't match the rest of the chamber. You tap it lightly with your boot, and the sound is hollow. The crate isn't just sitting here, it's covering something. Before you can investigate further, a shift in the air brushes the back of your neck. It's subtle, like a draft from an opening somewhere behind you, but the cave has no other entrance. You turn slowly, and in the dim light from the mouth of the tunnel, you catch the briefest movement, a shadow crossing just out of sight. The tapping sound returns, softer now, and from deeper in the cave than before. You back toward the entrance, the sound following you until you step into the light outside. The jungle feels different here, denser, the air warmer and still. You take one last look into the cave, but it offers nothing back, just the same quiet darkness and the faint smell of rust that clings to you as you walk away. The path out of the cave twists upward, forcing you to grip roots and rocks slick with moss. The air feels fresher here, though it's carrying a faint scent of smoke that doesn't belong to the sea or the jungle. You crest a low ridge, and the trees part just enough to reveal another clearing. But unlike the others, this one looks deliberately arranged. The grass is cropped short, the soil is hard-packed, and a ring of stones marks the perimeter like an unspoken boundary. In the center stands a structure that makes you stop. A tall, narrow tower built of stacked coral blocks, no wider than a single person, but rising at least 20 feet. Its surface is weathered into pale grooves, and a narrow slit runs from top to bottom on one side, like the island's version of a keyhole. You've seen watchtowers in coastal forts before, but never one this thin or this out of place. Historians still debate whether towers like this were used as lookouts, or as markers for something buried directly beneath. You circle the base, finding no visible entrance. On the side opposite the slit, a small plaque is set into the stone, its letters eroded to the point of unreadability. A single word remains clear enough to guess at: whisper. You're not sure whether it's the name of the tower, the island, or just a fragment of something longer. The ground near the base has been disturbed recently, patches of soil darker than the rest, as though something was dug up and replaced. You kneel to touch the earth, and it's cooler here, almost damp despite the heat. When you press your hand down, you feel a faint vibration, rhythmic and steady, like the pulse of a machine running deep underground. Stepping back, you tilt your head and peer through the vertical slit. At first, you see nothing but darkness. Then your eyes adjust and you realize there's movement inside. Small, slow sways, like fabric stirred by a breeze you can't feel. You lean closer, holding your breath, but the darkness swallows the shapes again, leaving you unsure if you imagine them. The breeze outside shifts suddenly, carrying with it a distant murmur. Too soft to make out words, but unmistakably human. It fades before you can locate the source, leaving the clearing as silent as when you arrived. The tower stands motionless. It's slit a narrow wound in the coral stone, and the island waits to see if you'll step closer again. You circle the clearing once more, scanning the tree line. The murmur is gone, replaced by the faint rattle of palm fronds high above, but the sound feels more like a cover than a coincidence. You take the narrow path leading away from the tower, its edges choked with vines, the kind that clings stubbornly to anything brushing past. The air grows warmer again, the sunlight breaking through in thin, jagged beams. After a few minutes, you stumble upon what looks like an old encampment. Rusted cooking pots sit in a neat row near the remains of a fire pit, their surfaces fused with soot. Beside them, a half-collapsed shelter still holds a frame of bamboo, the roof long rotted away. What stops you is the single folding chair sitting upright in the shade, its canvas faded but intact. The chair faces directly toward the path you just came from, as though someone had been waiting there for you. Behind the shelter, you find a series of shallow trenches dug into the earth. Some are filled with water, reflecting slivers of sky. Others are lined with wooden planks, so decayed you can press a finger straight through. Historians still debate whether these trenches were for drainage, defense, or something more ritualistic. The spacing is too even, too deliberate to be random. A glint catches your eye at the bottom of one trench. You kneel and reach in, pulling free a small metal locket. The hinge is rusted, but with a careful twist it opens. Inside is a photograph so faded the faces are just pale smudges, but the outline of two figures is still clear. One stands tall, the other much smaller, perhaps a child. You slip the locket back where you found it, unsure whether you're preserving history or avoiding it. The far end of the camp leads into another shaded corridor of trees. Halfway down, you notice something odd. All the trunks here bear the same mark, a shallow cut in the shape of a triangle. The marks are at eye level, fresh enough to be free of moss. You run your hand over one, the wood smooth and cool, and for a moment, you think you hear that faint murmur again, this time closer, almost behind you. You quicken your pace, emerging into another open space just as the sound fades. This clearing is smaller than the towers, but at its center lies a mound of earth topped with a single upright pole. Tied to the pole is a length of faded cloth, its edges frayed by time and wind. It flutters once, twice, then hangs still, as if it too has been listening. The cloth is faded almost to white, but faint streaks of red remain, like the ghost of a pattern long worn away. You brush your fingers over the fabric. It's brittle but still intact, the weave tight and strong despite years of weather. The pole itself is planted deep into the mound, which feels unusually solid underfoot, more like packed stone than loose soil. You tap it with your boot, and the sound is dull, not hollow, which only deepens the mystery of what's underneath. Kneeling beside the mound, you spot small shards of glass half buried at the base. They catch the sunlight in sharp, glinting flashes. One piece has the curve of a bottleneck, another the edge of a lens. You can't help but imagine who stood here last, what they were watching, and whether the pole once held a flag, a signal, or something meant to be seen only by certain eyes. Historians still debate whether isolated island posts like this were purely military, or if they doubled as coded waypoints in a much larger, secret network. A faint trail leads away from the mound toward denser undergrowth. You follow it, ducking beneath low branches until the trees open just enough to reveal a peculiar sight. A wooden bench, perfectly level, facing a single massive boulder. The bench is rotted through in places, but the arrangement is too deliberate to be random. You sit for a moment, the boulder's surface looming in front of you, and notice shallow carvings running across its face. Lines, circles, and symbols that don't match any military markings you know. As you lean closer to trace one of the symbols, A small stone clatters down from above. You glance up quickly, but the canopy hides everything beyond a few shifting leaves. No breeze follows the movement, no sound of retreating footsteps. Just silence again, thicker than before. You continue past the boulder, the path narrowing until you have to turn sideways to fit between two walls of jagged rock. The passage opens suddenly into a wide, flat space where the ground is covered entirely in pale sand, as if a piece of the shoreline had been dropped in the middle of the jungle. The sand is undisturbed except for a single set of footprints, bare, narrow, and leading directly to the center. They stop abruptly there, with no return prints, as if the person simply vanished. You stand at the edge, unwilling to step into the sand, and the jungle around you seems to lean closer, as if it too is waiting to see what you'll do next. You follow the line of footprints with your eyes, resisting the urge to step into the sand yourself. There's something about the way the pale grains seem to absorb light, making the center of the clearing look flatter, almost painted on. You crouch, scoop a handful from the edge, and let it slip through your fingers. It's colder than you expect, chilled in a way that doesn't belong under the hot jungle sun. Beyond the clearing, a low arch of twisted roots marks another path. You duck beneath it and find yourself in a place that feels more like a ruin than part of the forest. Stone walls rise from the ground in jagged, broken lines, some still bearing traces of plaster. The layout is too orderly to be natural. Doorways leading nowhere, stair steps crumbling into moss. You imagine a time when this was whole, perhaps a barracks or a storage hall, now surrendered to the trees. Historians still debate whether such ruins were pre-war structures repurposed by soldiers, or if they were built hastily in the chaos of occupation. A single corridor remains intact enough to walk through, the air inside cooler and damp. Your footsteps echo faintly, bouncing off the walls in uneven rhythms. Halfway down, you find a row of wooden shelves sagging under the weight of rusted tins, shattered bottles, and a few small crates marked with stenciled numbers. One box sits apart from the others, its lid askew. Inside, you find rows of glass jars, each filled with cloudy liquid. Shapes float within, too warped by time and fluid to recognize, but definitely organic. You close the lid and step back into the sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. At the far end of the ruins, a set of stone steps descends into darkness. The first few are dry, but farther down, water glistens in the dim light, reflecting the rippled surface above. You pause at the top, listening. The jungle sounds have faded entirely here, replaced by the faint drip of water, and there it is again, a murmur softer than before, but closer. You take one step down, then another, the cool air rising around you. The light narrows to a thin ribbon as the jungle recedes above, and you're left standing on the edge of a still pool, its surface black as ink. The reflection staring back at you doesn't quite match your own movements. You lean closer to the surface of the water, the dim light tracing a thin silver line across its stillness. Your reflection tilts with you, but there's a delay, just enough to make your skin prickle. When you stop moving, it continues for a fraction of a second, then freezes in place. You blink and it blinks back, a heartbeat too late. The pool's edge is lined with smooth stones, some carved with faint grooves and symbols you can't place. They're too precise to be natural, and too worn to reveal their full meaning. A few glisten faintly, as if coated in a thin sheen of oil, catching what little light seeps down from the surface above. Historians still debate whether such subterranean pools were ritual sites, water storage, or the remains of natural caves repurposed for something more secretive. You test the water with your fingertips. It's ice cold, far colder than anything on the surface could be. The chill travels up your arm in a slow wave, settling in your chest like a weight. You withdraw your hand quickly, but a faint ripple runs outward from where you touched, breaking the water's glassy calm. The reflection distorts, and for a moment you think you see another face beside yours, half in shadow, half grinning. The steps behind you are still dry, the air still cool, but there's a new sound now. It's faint at first, a slow, deliberate tapping from somewhere beyond the pool. It echoes irregularly, as if coming from behind a wall of stone. You scan the edges of the chamber until your eyes catch a narrow gap near the far corner, where water trickles down into darkness. You skirt the pool carefully, keeping your gaze fixed on the black surface, and crouch beside the gap. The tapping stops instantly. Only the sound of dripping water remains. You press your ear closer, but there's nothing. No air movement, no murmur, no vibration, just the stillness of stone. Pulling back, you glance at the pool one more time. Your reflection is normal again, perfectly matched, perfectly still. Yet as you turn to leave, you can't shake the feeling that if you look back one more time, it might still be moving without you. You climb the steps back toward the light, the air growing warmer with each step until the heavy scent of the jungle returns. The ruins greet you in silence, their stone walls draped in vines that sway faintly even without wind. You follow a narrow break in the wall that leads to a path flanked by thick bamboo, each stalk creaking quietly as you brush past. The path opens into a grove unlike anything you've seen so far. Dozens of stone markers standing at odd angles, half swallowed by roots. Some lean against each other, others tilt precariously, their carved faces eroded beyond recognition. A few still bear faint lettering in a script you can't quite identify. This is no military site. It feels older, as if the war only added another layer of history to an already ancient ground. Historians still debate whether islands like this were once sacred burial places long before the first soldiers set foot here. You walk between the markers, careful not to disturb the earth. In the center of the grove, you find a single upright slab, cleaner than the rest, as though someone has been tending to it. On its face is a shallow engraving, the outline of an island, with a small X marked inland. The location feels familiar, close to where you've already been. Resting at the base of the slab is an object you didn't expect. A helmet, dented and streaked with rust. Inside, a faint imprint of fabric remains where the liner used to be. You lift it gently, and a cascade of dried leaves falls out, scattering across the ground. Beneath them lies a single brass button, polished as if it had been handled recently. A rustle in the bamboo breaks the stillness. It's soft, almost polite, but undeniably close. You set the helmet back and turn toward the sound, scanning the green stalks. There's no movement now, no sign of anything passing through. Only the faint creak of bamboo swaying and the low hum of distant insects. You leave the grove, following a second path that leads uphill toward the ridge. The sunlight filters down in uneven stripes, and for a moment, the world feels almost normal again. Until you notice the shadows are moving in the wrong direction. You stop mid-step, watching the shadows stretch sideways instead of following the sun's angle. They slide across the ground like liquid, bending around rocks and tree roots without breaking. You glance up, half expecting clouds to be shifting overhead. But the sky above the canopy is a clear, steady blue. The sunlight hasn't changed, only the way it falls here. The ridge path narrows until you're forced to walk single file, hugging the slope. To your left, the ground drops steeply into dense jungle. To your right, a wall of rock rises straight up. Halfway along, you spot something embedded in the rock face, a set of shallow handholds carved long ago, leading up toward a narrow ledge. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. Climbing is harder than it looks. The stone is warm under your palms, the air still and heavy. At the top, the ledge widens into a hidden platform overlooking the sea. The water stretches endlessly, broken only by the faint outline of another island far on the horizon, but it's what's here on the platform that holds your attention. 3 weathered crates stacked neatly in a corner, their wood bleached silver by salt and sun. One crate is open, revealing rows of glass bottles. Most are empty, their corks crumbling, but a few still hold cloudy liquid with shapes suspended inside. They look almost like roots or twigs, until you notice one shifting ever so slightly when you tilt the bottle. Historians still debate whether such bottles were medicinal, ceremonial, or something far more experimental. Near the crates lies a bundle of old rope, coiled neatly beside a rusted pulley fixed into the rock. You follow the line of the pulley out toward the sea, where a frayed cable disappears into the water far below. Whatever it once connected to is long gone, swallowed by the tide. The shadows here move strangely too, less like they're cast by the sun, more like they're sliding across the stone of their own accord. You step back toward the ledge, careful to avoid them, and feel a sudden rush of cool air at your back. It smells faintly of smoke again, but this time there's something sharper beneath it. like metal freshly cut. You turn toward the source of the cool air, but there's nothing behind you except the stone wall and the crates. The breeze fades as quickly as it came, leaving a faint metallic tang in the back of your throat. You glance back toward the frayed cable leading into the sea, wondering if something down there, beneath the waves, might still be moving. The platform's far edge is rimmed with a low wall of stacked coral blocks, worn smooth by time. Between two of the blocks, you notice a gap just wide enough to slip your hand into. Your fingers brush against something cold and rigid. You pull it free, a small tin whistle, its surface tarnished but intact. You raise it to your lips, thinking better of it halfway, then slip it into your pocket instead. There's no obvious way forward except to climb down, but when you turn back to the carved handholds, the shadows have shifted again. They no longer stretch sideways, they point upward, converging toward a single spot high on the rock wall. You follow their alignment and spot a faint seam in the stone, just big enough to suggest a hidden door or hatch. Reaching it means pressing yourself against the cliff face, your boots finding purchase on tiny edges. When you finally make it to the seam, you see that it's sealed by a thin layer of mortar. A small mark is etched into the surface, an arrow pointing down, almost identical to the one you saw in the crate in the cave. Historians still debate whether such markings were codes for safe caches or warnings to leave whatever was inside alone. The mortar crumbles easily under your fingers, and soon you've cleared enough to pry the panel loose. It swings inward with a reluctant groan, revealing a narrow cavity in the rock. Inside is a single object, a rusted lantern with a cracked glass pane. You lift it carefully, feeling the faint rattle of something inside. When you shake it once, a shard of bone falls out onto your hand, small, clean, and unmistakably human. You place the lantern back, close the panel, and start your descent. But as you reach the last handhold, a soft, deliberate whistle echoes from somewhere in the jungle below, matching the exact pitch you heard in your head when you found the tin whistle. The whistle echoes once more through the jungle, sharper this time, the sound carrying in a straight line toward you. You freeze mid-step, heart thudding in the sudden stillness. The birds have gone quiet again, the kind of hush that feels rehearsed, as if the whole island has agreed to listen. The air is thick here, carrying the scent of salt and something faintly metallic, like old coins pulled from the sea. You follow the slope down from the ridge, pushing through tangled ferns until the ground evens out into a long strip of packed earth. It looks almost like a road, except for the way it ends abruptly at a wall of dense mangroves. The roots rise high, twisted and knotted, forming an almost perfect barrier. Historians still debate whether such clearings were part of the island's wartime defenses, or if they were older, serving a purpose long before the first uniformed boots landed here. You step closer to the mangroves, running your hand over the roots. They're damp, cold, and oddly smooth in some places, as if polished by countless hands. In the gaps between the roots, you catch glimpses of dark water moving sluggishly below. Every now and then, a small bubble rises to the surface and pops with a soft hiss. Something glints near your feet. You crouch and brush away the dirt to reveal a small circular badge no larger than a coin. It's embossed with a crest you don't recognize. Two crossed branches beneath a crown, surrounded by letters worn down to nearly nothing. You slip it into your pocket, though it feels heavier than it should for its size. The whistle comes again, closer now, and this time you can hear faint footsteps with it. Not in a hurry, but measured, deliberate, as if whoever's making them already knows exactly where you are. You scan the tree line, but the sound seems to come from everywhere at once, bouncing between the trunks and the mangrove wall. Then, without warning, the sound stops completely. You're left standing in the silence, your hand still on the root, as the water below the mangroves ripples once, then settles into stillness again. You pull your hand away from the root, wiping the dampness onto your pants. The air feels heavier now, as though the jungle itself has shifted closer. A narrow gap appears between two of the larger mangrove trunks, small enough to miss if you weren't looking directly at it. You crouch and step through, the roots brushing your shoulders like fingers trying to hold you back. On the other side is a narrow channel of water, no more than 10 feet across, its surface stained a deep, unnatural green. A low wooden jetty juts out into it, sagging with age, its posts capped with rusted metal rings. Tied to one post is the skeletal frame of a boat, nothing more than its ribs and a few warped planks, swaying slightly in the water. Historians still debate whether such boats were abandoned after the war, or if they were stripped deliberately. Their remains left as warnings. You step onto the jetty. It groans under your weight, the sound echoing across the water like a whisper. From here you can see the far bank, where another line of mangroves rises like a wall. A single opening cuts through them, perfectly aligned with the jetty, as if inviting you across. Something moves in the water. It's slow at first, a ripple that could be a fish, but then it breaks the surface and you see it's a helmet. It drifts lazily toward you, spinning slightly, until it bumps against the jetty's edge. Inside is a fistful of sand, perfectly dry despite the water. The urge to step back is strong, but instead you nudge the helmet with your boot. It tilts, the sand spilling into the water and sinking instantly out of sight. You look up to find the far bank opening in the mangroves is no longer visible. The wall of roots has closed completely, sealing the channel. Behind you, the whistle sounds again, this time from directly over your shoulder. You spin around, but there's nothing there. Only the empty jetty and the skeletal boat rocking gently beside it. The whistle fades into the steady lap of water against the wood, as if it had never been there at all. You step back toward the mangrove gap you entered from, only to find it gone, the roots twisted into an unbroken wall. The air smells heavier now, laced with something faintly sweet, like flowers long dead. You edge toward the bank, scanning for any path back. That's when you notice it, a faint shimmer in the air above the water, as if heat is rising from the surface. But the water here is cool. You can feel it in the dampness clinging to your skin. The shimmer bends, forming a narrow band that seems to connect the jetty to the center of the channel. Curiosity outweighs caution. You step forward and the boards of the jetty creak in protest. At the halfway point, you crouch and dip your fingers into the water again. This time, instead of a ripple, you feel something solid beneath the surface, flat and cold, like stone. You trace its edge and realize it's a carved slab, its surface etched with lines and symbols. Historians still debate the purpose of such submerged stones, navigation markers, burial covers, or perhaps something ceremonial. This one feels wrong. The lines are too straight, the symbols too sharp, as if the water hasn't touched them for long. A shadow passes beneath you, moving quickly across the slab. It's not the shape of a fish, and it's too large for a turtle. You lean closer, peering into the green depths, but the water clouds instantly, swallowing whatever it was. The boards beneath your feet tremble slightly, just enough for you to feel it in your knees. When you straighten, the far bank is open again, wide enough for a small boat to pass. And on the other side, just barely visible between the mangroves, is a figure standing perfectly still, watching you. The figure doesn't move, not even to adjust their stance. You can't make out a face, only the outline of a wide-brimmed hat and the suggestion of a long coat, the edges blending into the shadows of the mangroves. You blink, and the light shifts just enough that you realize something strange. There's no reflection in the water beneath them. You take a step toward the boat frame, testing the idea of pushing it into the water to cross. The wood creaks loudly, but the figure remains still. It's only when you set both hands on the boat's edge that they lift one arm, slowly, deliberately, and point. Not at you, but toward the submerged stone slab in the channel. A chill runs through you. You glance down, and the symbols on the slab now seem brighter, as if lit from within. The lines connect in a way you didn't notice before, forming the rough outline of the island itself. The same X you saw carved into the upright stone in the grove is here too, marked deep into the slab's center. Historians still debate whether such markings were meant as maps or warnings, but standing here, with the water lapping against the jetty and the figure watching, it feels more like an instruction. You look back toward the far bank. The figure is gone. The gap in the mangroves is wider now, and beyond it, you catch a glimpse of pale sand and something metallic catching the sun. The temptation to cross is overwhelming, but the slab still lies between you and whatever's waiting. You crouch again, pressing your palm flat against the stone. This time, there's no chill, only a steady warmth, as if the slab has been in sunlight all day. The symbols pulse faintly under your hand, and the water above them seems to thin, making the lines even clearer. Then, without warning, the whistle pierces the air again, this time from somewhere below the water. You leave the jetty without crossing, the echo of that underwater whistle still circling in your mind. The mangrove roots seem to part for you this time, letting you slip back into the jungle's green embrace. Every step feels heavier, not from fatigue, but from the sense that something is walking behind you, just far enough to stay unseen. The light changes slowly, gold dripping through the canopy, softening the edges of everything. The air warms, the sense of salt and earth blending into something almost comforting. The whispers of the island, those faint murmurs in the leaves, are no longer sharp. They're gentle now, almost like a lullaby. You reach the ridge again, the sea spread wide below, the horizon brushed in the fading light of evening. The island lies quiet, no whistle, no footsteps, only the faint rustle of distant trees, moving as if to a rhythm you can't quite catch. The weight in your pocket, the small badge, the tin whistle, reminds you that this place will not follow you home, but it will stay with you, in dreams and passing thoughts, in the quiet moments when you think no one is listening. The shadows grow long, stretching toward the water as the sun dips lower. You turn from the view, following the path back toward the beach. The sand cools beneath your feet, the waves rolling in with a steady, gentle sigh. You leave without looking back. Another page closed, another memory gone up in smoke. Good night. Please rate the level of disaster on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments section, and subscribe to hear more stories about historical disasters before you go to sleep. Good night, peaceful, dreaming of forgotten ruins. Good night. See you in the dust of history.